Hello, my name is Miss Lehner, and I am going to start our biochemistry unit with you. So remember, before we learned about scientific method and then the properties of water, so please keep in mind those two ideas as we move forward in this class. So we need to know in this specific unit what the word organic means. So all living things are made up of large macromolecules. And these large molecules are called biochemical compounds. A biochemical compound, they're known as organic, which means they have carbon and hydrogen. So these large compounds we are going to call macromolecules, which you've heard I said previously. Macro meaning large. All of life functions for organisms are carried on because of these macromolecules. So the four main classes we are going to go over in this class are carbohydrates, fats, which can also be called lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now this is just a diagram showing you in the top left corner, bread, pasta, rice. Those are examples of carbohydrates in a food form. Same thing on the right, a food form of proteins. We have steak, we have eggs, and then in the bottom right corner, we have different fats, so butters, we have bacon on there. And then in the bottom left corner, we have something that we are going to go over a little bit more in depth, which is nucleic acids, also known as DNA and RNA. So let's start from the beginning. What is a polymer? So a polymer, poly means many, so it's going to be many pieces that make up the macromolecule. A polymer, when it's composed of these smaller pieces, are bound together or linked together and form a chain. Now, how do they form a chain? It's called dehydration or condensation. These smaller molecules are the building blocks, and we're going to call these small molecules monomers. So a single unit or subunit is a monomer. When we link those small subunits together, we're going to call that our polymer or the chain of a polymer. So how do we have these subunits linked together? Well, they are bound together by covalent bonds. Covalent bonds we learned about in our previous unit. Covalent bonds are when electrons are shared. And how do these subunits share electrons? It's through a process called synthesis, and it's called dehydration synthesis, which we will go over that word later in this lecture. Now, in order to make these small subunits or these monomers link together to form a polymer, this requires energy, which we'll also go over. So a monomer is going to be one small molecule, so a single molecule. A polymer will be a long chain that it's made up of repeating patterns of monomers. So let's look at an analogy to make a little bit more sense of this topic. So imagine a beaded necklace. The necklace consists of many beads strung together to form a chain. So what does the entire necklace represent? Think about it, beads on a string. That's going to be many monomers linked together forming a polymer. So the entire necklace represents a polymer. What are the pieces or the subunits on the necklace? Those are the beads, so those are called the monomers. Now, when we have all of these monomers bound together to form a polymer, how do we represent the string? The string is going to be the covalent bond. And the process of stringing the beads together is called synthesis, specifically dehydration synthesis. And this process requires energy. Now below you see the long chain of beads bound together by the string. So the long chain is a polymer. One of those beads we're going to label as a subunit. And then the string itself, which we don't have labeled on here, is called covalent bonds. So when we look at these different pieces, one piece of our necklace is a monomer. Two or more subunits or monomers bound together will start to form a polymer. So let's start with starch. Starch is a type of carbohydrate. It has a hydroxyl group, and then the entire piece of a starch So that means where you see the subunit circled, that is the monomer. So that's one bead of our carbohydrate necklace. Now let's look at fatty acids. So fatty acids, the subunit, is going to be circled in red, and it's a carbon bound to 2 hydrogens. But when we put many of these subunits together, now we're going to have our fatty acid chain. Keep in mind, please, that fatty acids do have a carboxyl group. That is a carbon with a double bond to an oxygen and a single bond to an OH group, also known as an alcohol. Now let's look at peptides or polypeptides. So polypeptides make up proteins. All polypeptides will have nitrogens bound to hydrogens, which is called an amino group. One subunit is going to look slightly different than another subunit for proteins, and we'll go over why that is as we go through the protein lecture. So one subunit will bond to another subunit of a protein to start making our protein chain or our polypeptide chain. Now, this looks like one strand of DNA. So this is a type of nucleic acid. And we're going to see that nucleic acids have a phosphate group, and the subunit is going to be one piece of the entire molecule. So just in case you need a little something to remember all of the important elements that we're going to go over now, it's called HONC. So HONC, if you love biochemistry, we have hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. So which of the elements are found in biochemical compounds? So hydrogen, the symbol is just the letter H, and the number of bonds that are formed is 1. Oxygen, labeled with the symbol O, and it forms 2 bonds. Nitrogen, the symbol is the capital letter N, and it forms 3 bonds. And then carbon has the symbol C, and it forms 4 bonds. So the 4 elements, out of all of the 4 elements that we've just covered, the greatest number of bonds occurs in carbon. So carbon can make 4 bonds. Now, the next question, why are all biochemical compounds considered organic? Well, if you noticed, all of them have carbon and hydrogen. And then underneath, we are showing you an example of how many bonds each element is able to make. So hydrogen can have 1, nitrogen 3, carbon 4, oxygen 2. So why do we consider carbon the backbone of life? Well, the reason why all of these organic molecules can become as large as they do and as complex as they are, because carbon can attach themselves to another carbon, so to one another. And that is impossible for all other elements. They can also form chains thousands of atoms long, or rings of all sizes. That means something that looks more circular, kind of like a hexagon. The chains and rings can have branches and crosslinks, so that means where they intersect each other. Other atoms like hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen can attach to the chains and the rings, so they can actually attach themselves to the carbon molecule. The degree of complexity makes it possible for biochemical molecules to carry out life's functions, like respiration, breathing, nutrition, reproduction, locomotion, which is movement, synthesis, that means we're making something, transport, response to stimuli, regulation, that means changing, making sure that our body is in homeostasis, and then of course growth and development. Now, what you're going to do is work on the test yourself that your teacher has posted for you.